to be put into committee for consideration. So anyway, over the years I've worked on a number of campaigns, and including, yeah. Is that better? Yeah, okay. And then over the years I've worked on a number of campaigns. One of the most exciting campaigns I've worked on was Zach Duckworth in Lakeville. I was his campaign manager, where I was blessed with a candidate who worked very, very, very hard, and I was very proud to be a part of that effort, and all the efforts that went into that. Go to the next slide. And then just a little bit about me. These are my two kids, and this is why I do what I do. Tom is 3 and Mark is 1, and I want them to grow up in Minnesota where they have a great education, a promising future, and a flourishing economy where they can choose to do whatever profession they choose and be able to succeed in making Minnesota their home. So who is MNSEF? We are a nonprofit that started because conservatives weren't meaningfully a part of the energy discussion at the state level, and especially in discussions regarding clean energy and climate change. Not being at the table to discuss the options and the better things available to everyone. Especially the discussions regarding clean energy. When we are not at the table, we leave them to do and make whatever mandates and subsidies they want to do. Our current staff is made up of lots of conservatives with roughly 20 years of combined GOP legislative and campaign experience. And there's nothing inherently non-conservative about supporting clean energy. MNSEF speaks to and for conservatives. In fact, clean and renewable energy is compatible with true conservative values. We fight for promoting free markets, making strong economies, protecting God's creations, individual rights, property rights, less government, local control, national security. Energy is actually a national security issue. We need to be reliable within ourselves. And having more options available to diversify our grid is going to make our grid stronger and more reliable as we are able to pull in on different parts of a grid. Our grid is aging. The oldest parts of it are 85 years old, and with our needs only increasing with everybody's gadgets, everybody's Christmas lights that we're just all on, and the rise of electric vehicles, we're going to need a more stable grid that is not aging. Go ahead to the next one. So what do? We lead the discussion about decentralized market-driven energy solutions. That means we go into the room, we're at the table, and Democrats say, let's have mandates and subsidies. Absolutely not. A good example I like to use here is for close to 100 years, the telephone industry was regulated very similar to how energy is regulated today. And in the 1990s, at that point, there had been 2 innovations in telephones, the Princess phone and the touch tone phone. And then in the 1990s, they deregulated the industry. And once it was deregulated, we're 20 years later, and most of us walk around with computers in our pockets. That was just an opportunity for the industry to explode in innovation. They were able to compete to drive down costs so that the average person could have access to these technologies and an improvement on the way of life. Go ahead. So specifically, we advocate for energy resources that are affordable, cost-effective, and renewable. Now, renewable, but cost effective. They have to be cost effective in order for the average person to save money. The ratepayer should save money by bringing those things online. If they are not going to save that person money, we should not be investing in them. We need energy applications that are efficient, economical, and environmentally responsible. I don't know about you, but myself, I was put on this earth to be a good steward with my money and to be a good steward with the earth. I think it's a very unfortunate stigma that conservatives have that we hate the earth. None of us hate the earth. We love the earth. We love the outdoors. We love, I know lots of people love hunting and fishing, and that's just an absurd thing to assume. And to have that label is just silly, and we need to work hard to show people we do care about our earth. We do want to be good stewards. And then energy policies on conservation, preservation, and our values, and economic liberty. One of the big things we really fight for is property rights. If a farmer wants to diversify his income so that his son will have the financial stability to inherit the farm and continue operating it, so that when he has a bad year, like a drought year like we just have, he's got the cash base to make it to the next year, and hopefully a better year the next year. Go ahead. So energy powers our livelihood. When you walk into a room, you expect the light switch to turn on the lights. It provides a quality of life that separates us from all other parts of human history. The world, we can all agree, has been vastly different since we finished extending electricity into rural areas and farms. I know my grandpa-in-law didn't get electricity on his farm in southern Minnesota until after World War II. And so it really hasn't been that long that we have been able to enjoy this as a state, as a country, as a society, and as a planet. And it has enabled innovation across every industry for years and years and years. And while we primarily focus on clean energy generation, we are increasing our attention on efficiency, transportation, transmission, and storage. So efficiency, transportation, efficiency specifically, saving you money at home. We want your utility bills to go down. If it's not contributing to that, then we need to wait until the technology is there for it to continue. Transportation and transmission, let's do transportation. So electric vehicles. A year ago, how many Teslas did you see on the road? Not very many. Now, you see a lot. And so it's coming where a lot of people will be switching to electric vehicles. And whether everyone does, or you and household has one electric vehicle and one non, we need to be making sure that we are building an infrastructure to support an economy that has participating EVs and saving you money at home. We also need to look at how the gas tax, if a family is not having two vehicles anymore, then you're saving on the gas tax. So transmission. The transmission is part of the problem right now when we talk about rising energy costs. There is not enough transmission. Also, the transmission system is aging. So we have an aging transmission system, and there's not enough of it. And that is one of the most expensive parts of building a grid and stabilizing a grid. So going forward, we need to be at the table to make sure that the money is being spent wisely. It's going to be spent on transmission that works, and that transmission that not only supports us now, but is set up to support us for 50 years or more. And then storage. Exciting things are happening in the storage world. We are very, very, very close to having storage centers for wind, for solar. A lot of the arguments are, well, the wind's not blowing today. Well, it was windy yesterday, and so we put the excess energy that we didn't use into storage. And that technology is only going to get better and better. And then, when we're not at the table to talk about these things, what have the liberals ever been in complete control of that has been successful? Nothing. There's a good way to do this, and it's an exciting space to be in, and a good space to have influence on, because these things are going to be expensive, and you don't want another waste of billions of dollars on something that doesn't work, that isn't reliable, that's not stable, and so sometimes it's a space where they feel like they know better, and we need to show up in that space and tell them we care. We want to be a part of this conversation, and we want to be a part of the solution going forward. So, and when we're not at the table, we leave them to build the infrastructure they want. Instead of putting electric charging stations at area in places that not very many people go to, we should be doing private-public partnerships at movie theaters and restaurants, places people will actually be, and setting up a way that should you be paying for that electricity when you plug in your vehicle at a different place, just a lot like you get gas, supercharging stations at gas stations, and then they're free to use mandates and subsidies how they please, which stunts economic growth, stunts job growth, and new poll came out, clean energy jobs are the fastest growing in Minnesota. So that was a study done by SEAM that came out close to the end of summer and they look at jobs in the energy space. Go ahead. So evidence of an aging grid is in the news almost daily. Again, the oldest parts of the grid are close to 85 years old. And we have needs that are only growing. Electric gadgets and devices and vehicles are on the rise. So how do we stabilize the grid? Next one. Similar to how you would diversify your portfolio or your business, a diversified grid would do the same, creating stability, avoiding another situation like Texas. What happened in Texas is very confusing, but they knew that the windmills would not work at the temperatures that were coming. So they turned their grid to rely more on natural gas. What they didn't expect was the natural gas to fail because they hadn't correctly weatherized that as well. So when you depend too much on one source, you run the risk of having it not be stable and not reliable, and having people's lives on the line. And this is a very serious subject going forward. Go ahead. So what energy sources can we consider? Wind, solar, nuclear, oil, coal, hydropower. There's biofuels and ethanol, geothermal, natural gas, the advances in battery storage, and then hydrogen. A mix of these, different kinds make different sense in different parts of the state, making it more centralized and local, so that you can draw on the energy that is produced down the road, the windmills down the road, the solar panels down the road, your natural gas is down the road. It is windy one day, so the grid pulls on the wind. It's sunny another, the grid pulls on the sun. And then it's not sunny, it's not windy, you turn up the natural gas. You have different sources that you can rely on to make the grid stable. Oh, I just talked about So, and then also, coal plants experience frequent outages due to supply chain disruptions. Who has heard about the supply chain problems right now? It's a very real problem, and that's why having local options and free markets to encourage these options to have lower prices is the best way forward. Go ahead. So, and then this provides clean baseload power built. We build more nuclear and cost-effective coal, especially with carbon capture. There is just great technology happening with carbon capture and being able to use all these different sources. Go to the next one. This is from a poll done by Clean Energy, Conservative Energy Network, just this last November. So there is support across party lines for putting competition in the energy space. A tax on emissions, 19% down at the bottom. The Democrats only support tax on emissions at 19%. They don't even have support for it within their own party. So from a policy and political perspective, the race is over, and an energy system with diverse and increasingly clean inputs has won. That's what voters expect, as per the last slide. That's what voters expect, and they will and have punished candidates who disagree. And they're right, that system has led and will lead to a cleaner, more cost-effective system for all. Keyword there is cost-effective. I have knocked on thousands of doors for conservative candidates in the suburbs, places we need to win as conservatives to keep control of the Senate and win back the House and the governorship. We need the suburbs, and the suburbs really cares about this. We need to show them that we care too, that we're at the table talking about real solutions to these problems, and that we're not just saying no and leaving it to the liberal agenda and their goals. So, done. So do you have any questions? Oh, and then also a program of MNSEF. We have Land and Liberty. They go into the field. It consists of a coalition of farmers and landowners and key stakeholders who are very concerned about protecting private land rights. And there's lots of movements out there about telling a farmer, you can't put a windmill on your property, you can't put solar on your property, and XYZ. And I'm sorry, a farmer should be allowed to do with his land what he wants. That's just what I believe.
Questions? Let me ask one first. With everything changing, and we always hear solar and wind are the most important things. Are you or are you not saying that that is true? And if you aren't saying that's true, are we talking about nuclear and natural gas as the most cost-effective alternatives, and especially for Minnesota?
I think nuclear and natural gas can be very cost-effective if the left would admit that they were clean sources of energy, which they very much are, and can then be a part of the conversation. Right now, the left wants to talk about wind and solar, and prices are coming down on wind and solar enough for them to be cost-effective and viable sources of energy right now. The nuclear conversation is going to be a long one, and one we need to fight for. It can very much be a stable part of our grid.
Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Minnesota currently has a requirement that 25% of our electricity come from renewable energy, wind and solar. Mm-hmm. Does MNSAF support repealing that because they don't support mandates for renewable energy?
Yeah, if we're not...
Repeat the question. We only have one microphone today.
Does MNSEF support repealing the legislation that requires 25% of the grid to come from renewable resources? I would say yes, with the addition of bringing down the monopolies. You have, when you sign up for utilities in your house, how many options do you have? Usually one, sometimes two. And they get to set the prices, they get a rate of return. They're basically a government entity with a guaranteed income. And while they say, you know, we're putting all this renewable energy on the grid, and while that's good, they're doing that because that's what that's what customers want and expect. But there's they get to set the prices to whatever they want. So bringing down monopolies would open up a free market, would create a space where companies can come in and provide you energy at the cheapest price, and you would have a choice of, instead of one or two, you'd have 3, 4, 5 people to choose from, bringing down your rates. So if it came with just eliminating the monopoly that is no longer needed, then yeah. Yeah.
Mitzi's place, they have a
What are
choice.
you hearing about options for disposal of wind turbine blades? I've been reading about that is an environmental problem.
Yes. Not only wind turbine wind turbine blades, recycling them, but also recycling solar panels too. At some point, we're going to need to recycle these different things. Many of them have precious metals in them, and we need to also open that up to a free market. If there's a demand for these wind turbine blades to be recycled, an innovative company would step up and figure out how to recycle these things. We have done it with computers. That was a big, e-waste was a big conversation of what do we do with all these computers, with all these chemicals and precious metals in them, and the market was allowed to develop those. So, yeah.
One thing we don't need is windmills, solar panels. What we do need is something that's gonna power those cars. But those cars aren't gonna run after 36 hours sitting in the snow in some state. Now, what we need is nuclear power, gas power, and most of all, we need something that we can store. You can't store electricity put it in a big battery, but you can store coal, enormous piles of clean burning coal. And for every clean burning coal plant that we shut down in this country, China opens up 10 dirty ones. So
Yes.
there's only one thing, and we gotta stop doing away with our coal-fired plants. Their current coal burning plants are clean and they don't pollute.
Yeah, so carbon capture technology, capture technology makes that a good option. But in some parts of the country where coal's not easily accessible to the grid, other options are needed, like nuclear.
Nuclear.
Yes, we need
But
to
we also need the gas.
and natural gas.
Windmills
Yeah.
need an enormous amount of oil. And that's one thing that they didn't get the right oil in down in Texas. They've got to use the right oil. And they use plenty of it on a windmill.
Yeah, and they failed to weatherize, and when they still haven't. If you look into have they fixed their problem, they still haven't weatherized a lot of their grid, and if it's as cold this winter as it was last winter, they're going to have a lot of problems. So.
Well, there's no way that I'd ever own a electric car. It's like running on a battery.
Oh, 3% of the cars in Minnesota are electric, but that's going to be on the rise. and they're going to become more and more reliable. And I'm not saying you have to buy one now. I'm not saying it might be a while until some of you buy them, or if ever. But we have to be planning for the future so that the liberals don't get to set the rules and how we go forward as Minnesota. So yeah.
Is there anything being done on the biomass side where we generate electricity from the, what do you call it, these grasses and wood chips and all this agricultural byproducts? Is there anything being done to take all those agricultural byproducts, burn them, and convert it to electricity where we're not relying on solar, we're not relying on wind, with that's a constant, and it's also a revenue source for our rural communities? Is there any work being done on that?
Yep. So is there any work being done on the biomass side of burning byproducts from farms, from agriculture, to create electricity? And yes, I am meeting with some biomass people next week and to learn more about that. So I would love to come back and talk to you about that. But yes, I know there is. Yeah. Go ahead.
Follow up on biomass.
Yeah.
I worked 36 years for MnDOT, was chief environmental officer when I retired. We worked with Rare Malting, which is down in Shakopee. They have a cogeneration plant using their malting waste to generate. They were looking for something else. We cut a contract with them to cut hay on 169 roadside, to burn that. They never utilized it, and here's the reason why. If the transportation costs of that malt are paid for by another process, it works for cogeneration. Same with corn stover at an ethanol plant. But the cost of the diesel to cut that hay and transport it to the cogeneration plant, natural gas was up. The price of natural gas and diesel are connected, and the price of natural gas is always cheaper than the cost of diesel to bring that biomass to the plant just for itself.
Yeah, and that's a good example of why diversification is so important, because you have something you want to do, but it's not financially viable right now. In Ohio, there was $60 million of bribes given out to conservative legislatures because the coal industry needed a bailout and they weren't going to get it, and so they had to figure out how to get a bailout. They weren't financially viable anymore. And while that's Ohio, it's just a good example of, while something makes some sense somewhere, it might not make a lot of sense somewhere else. So just keeping an open mind about what makes sense for your area, for your local grid, for and your options as a ratepayer, as a consumer, and how many options do you have? Do you want more? Do you want lower prices? Opening up the market to bring all those prices down and encourage innovation and new technology is going to bring your rates down. So.
Just on the area of new technology and talking about nuclear and a diverse power grid that has multiple forms of energy production. Have you heard about small modular reactor technology in nuclear?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and that seems to be a relatively finite way of producing nuclear energy with a lot of safeguards that have been developed over the last 50 years or so, but I think if that's starting to get some development now, that could be a big part of a low emission, high efficiency, reliable source of nuclear power.
Yeah, exactly. He was talking about the smaller, they're basically mini nuclear power plants that you could put anywhere and use as a clean energy source. A lot of submarines use nuclear power to power themselves. If that's safe for them to travel the world and protect the United States and protect our coasts, why can't we be using that? And so, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
If you cited in your presentation that wind turbines don't work when it gets too cold, so like if we have another polar vortex and we're reliant on wind or solar at night, like when the heating demand is going to peak, how are they meaningfully contributing to the diversity of the grid in that circumstance? Because if they can't operate, they're actually not providing the service that we're paying for.
So, the question was, at night the sun's not shining, and so your solar panel isn't working. So how is that contributing to the grid? And the answer for that is when they plan out the grid and the percentage of where they're going to get that energy, they know the sun is not going to be shining at night. So they plan the grid to pull from either natural gas or if the wind is blowing, the wind turbines. And it contributes when it's sunny to bring down your rates and to provide you energy. So they know when they're building these solar panels and the wind turbines that sometimes the wind's not going to be blowing and sometimes the sun's not going to be shining. And so diversifying the grid means you pull from one area at a time. And so just like your portfolio, certain parts of your retirement do really well some years, some do better the next year. At some point in say a week, the wind is going to be strong, so you pull from it then. The sun is going to be shining, so you pull from it then. And then and in the off times where that's not being reliable, nuclear, I'd love to include nuclear in there and have that conversation. Then we pull from nuclear or we pull from natural gas, whatever locally you have accessible to you. So.
I'm going to ask one question, and you can answer it then. The solar and the wind, you're saying maybe are fairly good because we use them, but I'm saying they're not cost effective. They don't take into the consideration that on solar particularly, you have to replace them every 10, 12 years, and then you have all the problems with recycling the blades and so forth, and that they aren't equating that into the picture, whereas the nuclear always does that because it's 40, 50, 60 years of power. And so I'm saying, if the nuclear is giving us 40, 50 years of power, why are we even considering nuclear or solar? I mean, solar or
yeah, for sure. So right now the prices on wind turbines and solar panels are going down and making them cheaper for you. And we need to recycle them. That needs to be a problem that needs to be figured out, to make them either back into solar panels, new ones, or into some other product that we can use among us. And yes, nuclear would make all of that even cheaper, but the left won't come to the table and have that conversation. And if they want to meet their crazy goals, nuclear is going to need to be a part of the conversation, and it's getting them to realize that. And but yeah, technology has come so far in the last 5 years. It's going to be vastly different in the next 5 years, and the subsidies for wind and solar are almost up, and the market's going to be able to just explode with innovation and allow for technology to develop, making things cheaper. So, I mean, MNSF really, really can't stress enough how much we just fight for free market principles. The energy market should be allowed to evolve how they want to evolve, to make things cheaper for you. And so, yeah.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, is this yours?
Thank you.
I won't comment too much more on the energy. I will just say one thing, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But it seems that it may be innovating for the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever, exploding, and those are all good if they're cost effective. But if they aren't cost effective, why are we pursuing them right now? And I know you're saying the liberals are allowing us, and we have to do that. but I am saying we need to go with the things that are inexpensive now. Otherwise, it's not cost effective for the future until it gets cost effective. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, very good. So anyways, okay, our next meeting is Tuesday, February 8th, Tuesday, February 8th. Our first hour speakers include Jake Duesenberg, he's the head